Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you for joining us here today on this occasion to celebrate the life of Gary William Johnson. It means a lot to all of us here that you would take your time, which really, when it comes down to it, is our most valuable resource. So thank you for taking your time to come here and celebrate the life of a great man who I was fortunate enough to know as my father. Couple quick notes. We would like to thank my sister-in-law Amanda for all her efforts throughout the course of the illness my father battled. She was a tremendous inspiration and help to us all, so we would like to publicly acknowledge that and thank you again for all you gave and all you do. Really appreciate it. We're going to start with a quick prayer. If you believe, please join me. If not, please observe a moment of silence for my father. Our holy and precious Father, we thank you for the opportunity to come together and celebrate the life of Gary William Johnson, all his accomplishments and all he meant to everybody in this room. He was a man of great humor, great integrity, and a teacher to all. We thank you for his life and the way it touched us all, and we pray in your holy and precious name. Amen. So when I think back about the life of my father, he was a tremendous impact on me. Great sense of humor, great teacher, always really just kind of guiding me along as a father. I would not be the man I am today without him in my life, and really fortunate to have had a father that was so devoted and so capable over my 44 years. So really blessed to have had him as a father. Really had some great times. I remember one of our times we went fishing, and I was fortunate enough to catch a full skeleton of a fish. So that was quite the adventure, but I remember him trying to help me reel this thing out of the lake we were fishing, and we both were excited. We thought surely I'd caught a monster fish, and it turns out the rib cage was just sliding along the bottom of the lake and putting up quite the fight. So there's many stories like that. Got to spend a lot of special moments with my father over the course of our years together. And in one of our final conversations, I was talking to him about just everything he'd meant to me, the blessing he was to me in my life, and how grateful I was for that, because he lost his father at a very, very early age. They had a relationship and he got to know his father, but he lost them early on in his life. So I'm just so grateful for all the time that I did get with my dad, all the love and appreciation that he poured into me over the years. Just real thankful to have been able to experience that. The other thing I would like to say is just, in our conversations, I was talking to him about kind of the beliefs that I hold, and we were conversing about kind of what he believed and just kind of working through that together. And one of the things I told him is, when I read from the Bible and I think of kind of some of the perfect love that's contained in those passages and prescribed to us by our Holy Father, I think my dad really personified that. And the way that he loved my brother and my mom and I really just kind of shows that perfect love. And I certainly did not always make it easy. I gave him plenty of reasons to be frustrated, angry, disappointed, but I never got anything but love and compassion from him. And that's the thing that I really take away from him as a father, is just he was all in, and it was all love all the time, whether I deserved it or not. And I will always be grateful for that. It makes me consider that as I'm trying to be a father myself, and I'm thankful for his example as both a father and a husband, because I feel like I'm far better equipped with those examples than I would be without them. So truly appreciate all he's meant to me over my time here, and would like to thank you all again for coming to join us and celebrate the man I knew as my father. Thank you very much.
Sandy, Andrew and Parker, thank you. Every church has that one member that everybody quietly says, now that one is going to turn out all right. And for us, that was Gary. When he was a teenager, he belonged to the Methodist Church in Parisburg, Virginia, where my father, Reverend Jim Hankins, was the minister, and Daddy absolutely adored him. I was 12 years old in the summer of 1961 when we moved there, and it didn't take long before Gary stepped into the MYF leadership, Methodist Youth Fellowship. And I must tell you, as a young girl, I was completely in awe of him. Gary was always so well dressed with that button-down collar and the buttoned-up cardigan. Calm, confident, he just had that presence. And now most of the boys that I knew at that age owned one clean shirt, and they counted that maybe as a long-term life plan. But not Gary. He somehow made good manners look cool, which in the early 60s was practically supernatural. He represented our church youth in many ways. He stood at the groundbreaking of the new church. He served as the youth delegate to the Methodist General Conference at Purdue University. He was the Tazewell District MYF president. And then, of course, he was our MYF president extraordinaire. Though I think we all really suspected his spiritual gift was making church meetings feel really fun, at least mercifully shorter. So today, we gather with more gratitude than grief because some lives just don't pass through time, they help shape it. In those hopeless, restless, hopeful years of the 1960s, when the world seemed to change just about every 15 minutes, Gary stood among us and he did something simple but holy. He believed in us. What Gary understood long before many others did, and what we young people were not just empty vessels to be filled, but we were sparks. And his job, as he seemed to see it, was to protect those sparks long enough for us to figure out how to shine. In the fellowship hall, on those destinations unknown, on trips and summer and fall hayrides, he listened more than he talked. He understood that faith needs room to breathe. He knew doubt wasn't our enemy, and he knew that young people grow best when they are met with patience and laughter and love. Most won't remember Gary's lesson and every lesson that he taught, but we remember how he made us feel. We remember being seen. We remember being taken seriously. And we remember knowing, without him ever having to say those words, you matter. Your voice matters. Your life matters. And that's why Gary's legacy didn't stay inside the Sunday school rooms or the MYF meetings. It walked out into the world in teachers, in parents, ministers, and quiet servants. Gary understood something really important, that real leadership isn't about standing taller than everyone else. It's about helping other people stand tall themselves. And I know he carried that understanding with him all through his life. And now his work is finished, and he rests in that great mystery we United Methodists have trusted all along. So today we say goodbye, knowing what Gary planted in his youth is still growing today. And in the words of one of my very favorite United Methodist ministers, Reverend Dan Kelly, and all God's people said, Amen. Thank you.
Well, Sandy asked me to speak about the legacy of Gary Johnson. So I tried to keep it down to about 30 pages. First, in dealing with subjects in his career, subjects that were really frequently described in terms of passion and emotion and subjectivity, subjects like scenic beauty and natural harmony, ecological preservation, or historic and cultural preservation, these topics are frequently passionately debated. And Gary had to deal with these topics on a daily basis and deal with all the emotion that sometimes came with discussion of these topics. Gary had a deep respect for process. And I'm not sure this respect for process can be taught. You know, and I think in his case, and even on the words that you had just mentioned, it might be the result of somebody's life path. You know, Gary grew up in a small town in the mountains. He went to college and then the Air Force and then back to college. I think that was really important for him. And because of his career path, he went to some of the most beautiful places on planet Earth. And Gary got to experience an astounding diversity of people and personalities, and at the same time, a huge dose of Mother Nature. I did not know Gary in the formative years or during the years he worked for Denver Service Center on 56 national parks. But in the early 1990s, we learned that he would be returning home to the Blue Ridge to work for one of the most interesting and challenging national parks, America's favorite park, the Blue Ridge Parkway. When Gary arrived, I met him because we were working on an open-ended service contract, and he immediately put his team of designers to work to solve highly complex multi-party problems in a team format. One such project had been steeping when Gary arrived. It involved 2 real estate developers, 3 nonprofits, a county government threatened with a lawsuit, a regional planning agency, a congressman's office, all to work with the National Park Service and seek a solution to developing parkway-adjacent lands within critical viewsheds of the park. So, Gary gets us all in a room for a week and mapped out a work plan that required every party to do their part in the form of a kind of a team-building exercise, and with daily progress toward a mutual goal. At the end of the week, every party had what they wanted. The first time I saw this, I attributed it to luck, or maybe magic, because I'd never seen anything work quite like that. But I hadn't seen the full power of Gary's logic and process. So over the decades, I participated and witnessed success again and again and again with the same result. Over and over, at the beginning of the week, adjacent developers or highway departments and NPS in battle stations, and at the end of the week, shaking hands on a common solution. Every time, 100% win. So I don't know if you figured this out, but luck and magic don't deliver 100% results. and so how does this work? These results needed more study. And the more I studied this, I realized the formula is remarkably simple. And it builds on some of the values you were just mentioning. Number 1, respect everybody and their perspective. Number 2, find the mutual goal. Number 3, document what everybody must have. And I think 4th and most importantly, involve all the players to seek the solution. Gary's process transforms the energy that so often is wasted in conflict, and it changes it into cooperatively finding a solution that not visible to any one party. So when confronted with less than friendly introduction to a potential adversary, Gary would say, "I'm a process guy. We," and you guys know this, "we will figure this out by using a process." And I've learned later that these one-off kind of projects were just the beginning. One day, Gary called and he said, "David, meet me Saturday morning at 7:30 at the US 220 on-ramp." Why? Because I've got 200 Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. I've got 1,500 seedlings. By the way, bring some of your contractor friends. Time to get the Blue Ridge Parkway off of Scenic America's most endangered list. A true project of fun. Another time he called and said, "Hey, we've got a grant, a chance to document and share the conservation design formula we've been working on with all 4,500 Parkway neighbors." This was truly deep, Gary. After getting the formula down, you scale it to something the size of the entire Blue Ridge Parkway. He had processes for everything, both at work and at play. "David, I've got the entire Blue Ridge Parkway all choreographed on a score like a symphony," he said one day. Gary had diagrammed the layers of the forest, the canopy, the shrubs, the grasslands, buildings, cemeteries, all like notes on a musical score. This was a hobby, this was a work job. All 469 miles of musical score. And after trying it out, he said, "By the way, it plays best when you drive it from north to south." I'm sure that others here will be able to tell you a lot more detail about the kindness and respect and commitment that Gary brought to all of his pursuits. As you hear their stories, just think a little bit about this legacy. Gary worked to gain the Blue Ridge Parkway status as an all-American road, which was a very early all-American road by Federal Highways National Scenic Byways program. Gary nominated the Blue Ridge Parkway to the National Register of Historic Places, only to have the Department of Interior up his ante and put it on the register as a National Historic Landmark. One of his last projects, Gary worked with a panel of Scenic Virginia visual resource experts to develop and launch the Virginia Viewshed program. This very process-oriented documentation work is a national prototype of what can and is likely to be a National Register of Views. And then Gary worked on these publications: the visual character of the Blue Ridge Parkway, the Blue Ridge Parkway Neighbor's Guide, and he was chief author of Experiencing the Blue Ridge Parkway as the Sum of Its Parts, and the NPS Visual Best Practices program, which now provides a method for the National Park Service to preserve the visual landscape of all parks. So each of these manuals provides far-reaching impact for preservation of the visual landscape for all Americans through transmitting the formulas to the experts in the field for generations. So every time you enjoy a vista from the Parkway, indeed any national park, or a preserved view throughout Virginia and soon to be the United States, you can thank Gary and the legacy for putting together these methods to preserve our scenic resources. So well done, my friend and colleague. Well done, process guy. Well done.
Well, I'm happy to be here to celebrate Gary's life because he was certainly one of my favorite supervisors in all of the National Park Service. I had worked at 4 different parks before I'd gotten here, and I'd worked in the regional office for every park in the Southeast. But I remember when I had the opportunity to come here, that I had to interview with Gary first. And that was quite an experience for me, because he asked me every question in the book of what my experiences were. And, you know, was I a planner? Well, I'd had some experience in planning, but certainly not to his standards. And, you know, he wanted to know if I was a good writer, and I said, well, I've written some things, but mostly my experience has been in design and construction of the National Park Service. What I didn't know at that time was that's what he was looking for. And when I was working in Atlanta, I really didn't like Atlanta. I'd enjoyed the regional office, but being on the Blue Ridge Parkway was the one park that I didn't get to work for in all of the Southeast. And it was, when you worked in the regional office, everybody, all the other parks you went to said, well, the Blue Ridge Parkway gets all the money, we don't get nothing. But when I got to the Parkway, I realized that, yeah, we got some money, but the incredible resource that the Parkway it needed every dollar that we ever got. Gary was probably the most rounded landscape architect I'd ever worked with. Not only was he great at planning, but he was a great landscape designer, and he taught me a lot. He was a great teacher. And, you know, he treated us with an open door always. You could always feel like you could go to him if you had a question, and there was many along the way that I had questions about on the Parkway. You know, the resource protection was very, very important to him, and you understood that right away. So when I got to ride with him on the Parkway, I heard lots of stories about his family. He talked about his family a lot, but we also talked about those resources and how we needed to protect them. And he always emphasized, don't let Federal Highway ruin it. You know, he got us. And, you know, he used to kid sometimes that, you know, that's what made my hair white. So, you know, anyway, he taught me a lot there. We rode the Parkway a lot together, and we talked not only about those resources in the Parkway, but about his family, about his growing up. I felt like I grew up much like him. I grew up in a family of 12, but you know, we grew up on a farm, and he, very similar way that he grew up. So when you were in a meeting with him, he was very commanding. He knew what he wanted, and usually, when he went to the regional office a few times, he came back with success. And so some of the projects, I just wanted to talk about some of those, you know, items on the Parkway that's in his book, the parts that, some of its parts, because there were a lot of them that I was involved with him in the first 5 years that I worked for the Parkway. One of them, of course, he was working on the first GMP for the Parkway. And that was a long process. He came up with 3 amazing alternatives, and he worked through them with everyone. Everyone understood very well what he was thinking, and he succeeded with that first GMP. I got involved with that a little bit as far as the visual protection on the Parkway and all that he wrote. And, you know, he worked with counties all along the whole of the Parkway to evaluate those scenes, and he was very community-oriented. One thing I didn't know about him was that he first studied sociology, and now that makes a lot of sense to me because he was so community-oriented. And he worked with the 9 congressional districts, congressmen, and everything. And, you know, I think everybody respected him. I felt like a team working for him, that everyone who worked with him had a purpose, and he gave us freedom to do what we needed to do because he was very busy, you know, doing what he needed to do. You know, we had lots of things we were doing. I mean, we were doing the visual protection of the Parkway. You know, I know Laura did a lot of that. I did some of the mapping with that and everything. It was quite an undertaking. And I'm so glad that he finished his book for the National Park Service, because he had vision in that field like no one I'd ever known about. Now, one of the things I got involved with in that was we had to write a visual assessment for the Cherokee school that was being built at the very beginning. And they didn't like our conclusions about the impact that that school would have, because when you would go to those overlooks and you would overlook that site, it was like being back in the 1300s or something. You could not see development there, and so we gave it a pretty bad review as far as what we thought the impact would be. Unfortunately, it did not, be taken seriously in the EA. We felt like maybe we lost there a little bit, but I know that his impact on community development all along the parkway made a difference. Trying to keep houses from being seen on the parkway and other developments, or maybe a cell tower was going in. I remember going out with him on a few sites and having to, have a balloon up in the air and make sure we couldn't see it from the parkway. Very important to him, very important to the scenic evaluation of the parkway. We had agricultural leases, many of them that we dealt with. We had that going on. We had developments going on at the park that hadn't been there before, like the music center. And then, of course, our new visitor center at the headquarters there. And we were involved in all kinds of design there. I remember when they were designing the visitor center, that when they first came up with, it was going to be an all-green building, and it was even going to have a green roof, with plants on it and everything. We thought, well, gee, that's new and it's wonderful, but does it really fit here? Do we really need it in all this beautiful trees and everything? And the thought of watering the roof and such. But that came to be. But when they first designed the parking lot, and I was reviewing it, I went to Gary, because I could always go to him. We were a team, and he treated us like that. I said, this parking lot just isn't going to work the way they got it. We don't want to be pulling off into the main road when they're coming in. And he said, well, you work on it then. So he let me do that. And I did some sketches working with Al, who was also a mentor, like Gary was. And we changed that whole parking area idea. And, of course, it was designed well for drainage and everything. And so I remember, too, that the congressman at the time wanted a big IMAX there. And, we talked about that. We didn't have enough visitors for that. And what are we going to do with an IMAX here? And we changed that. Now it's more of a nice, if you've seen the video, at the headquarters, it's a wonderful video. I know Gary worked with that a lot, too. His ability to work with people was better than anyone I'd ever worked with. And it taught me a lot about that in the beginning. And then came the music center, which was another one of the pearls along the landscape. Very important design. We worked with Mr. Stanley Abbott's son, to get that design done. And I was a part of the construction inspection on that. And I worked with some of the architects from the regional office that were always working with that too. And I remember going there and pointing out to Gary that it looked like they had some granite from Mount Airy's that was called the salt and pepper. And it was white and black. And he goes, oh no, we're getting over there right now. It has to be gray. All the parkway granite, it's another one of those parts of the parkway that had to be preserved and protected. And you didn't put a concrete curb when there was granite there before, I'll tell you. So, yeah, we changed that. I remember And when we did EAs, we did several EAs there, and we lost some things we really wanted. We wanted a covered bridge to go to the amphitheater, and we lost out on that through value analysis process. Gary was a little upset about that, but I don't know if you've been to the music center, but the music's there at the amphitheater is wonderful. I've been to several now. But one of the things that we wanted to do there was have individual areas for musicians to play, you know, and they could have small groups of people. And the EA kind of, you know, it didn't happen there either. So we didn't get all that we wanted, but what we got was pretty tremendous. It's a really wonderful facility. It's another one of those pearls along the way. And, you know, when I first started with the Parkway, I remember Gary taught me about all these things. That, you know, while I've had a lot of experience as a landscape architect, maybe in design, I certainly didn't understand the Parkway yet. And with all these travels that I did with him, I learned along the way what he valued and what, you know, we needed to protect. So I worked with Gary for 5 years, and then he gave me the opportunity to apply for a job with the Denver Service Center as a project manager. And I really didn't want to leave my position as a resident landscape architect because it was the best position I'd ever had in the Park Service. But he agreed with me that it was a very important job. And if anybody could change how the Parkway looked and keep it from being preserved, was the Federal Highway Administration. You know, they did all of our design, and I see Sandy smiling because she probably heard a lot of stories there. But he, you know, he certainly respected the Federal Highway Administration, but, you know, one of the examples that I could cite was that when the Parkway was being constructed along sections 2A, B, and C, there were pretty much just a ruble, what they would call, what they did was they took all the rock that they had excavated from the Parkway and they put it alongside the road in strings and lines. And it was just their inconvenience mainly. But then the Federal Highway Administration had the idea that those now needed to be guard walls. And they had to be 27 inches high. And Gary said, well, you can't see over a guard wall that's 27 inches high. You're going to miss out on this beautiful landscape that you're going through there. And so Gary and I sat down and we talked about some design scenarios that would be preventing the guard walls experience. We went to Shenandoah, we looked at what they had built, and they were 27 inches high. You couldn't see over them. I mean, that's the detail that he got to, was no more than 24 inches high, that these stone ruble walls needed to look like they did. Some of them were large stones, the full width and height of the wall. We needed to maintain that. So we came up with some designs of putting in footings beneath those walls. We pinned the walls. We kept them. The key term Gary came up with, guide walls, the process that Mr. Hill was talking about. You know, he knew where he wanted to go and he knew how to get there. And he knew how to bring you along to get there. And I always appreciated that about him. He made my job so much easier to work with him because you knew what he was thinking. You could sit with him and say, this is what we got to do. How do we get there? And that process, you know, helped you get there. Today those walls look exactly like they did, you know, only better. They're more stable. They're, you know, the stone is in the pattern. When the contractor took them apart, all the stones were lined up, and when they put them back together, you wouldn't have known that the stone had been changed, you know. I really appreciated working with them on that. Now, one of the things when we were building that, Gary told me a story that at milepost 245, when he was a young landscape architect in the Blue Ridge Parkway and doing work like Al Hollister did for years, where he was a project specialist, his supervisor made him put in a concrete waterway at milepost 245. And everything was ruble, and he wanted that there. But he got sideways with the supervisor somehow, I understand. And that's when he went to the Denver Service Center and became a great planner and everything. Well, when we were working on that project, I changed that waterway to ruble, back the way it should have been, and he appreciated that, you know. There were always kinds of stories like that with Gary that you had fun working with him, that he made things pleasurable, and he brought the pressure of things down to earth, you know. We had a good relationship with the other divisions of the Parkway. I know when the Ranger Division said that they wanted special signs on the Parkway, you know, because there was all these curves along the Parkway that were dangerous, and we needed to come up with something that would improve safety but not the visual impact. And I remember working with the Rangers on some new sign plans that would protect certain, maybe 8 or 10 different most dangerous curves where we put in special signs for motorcyclists and everything. And we made a difference. While it was contrary to the sign plan, we altered it a little bit, you know. Always, like I say, a pleasure to work with him on things like that. When we did the Blue Ridge Music Center, I think we were proud of what had been accomplished there. The fact that he got the scenic highway designation that Mr. Hill, and then, you know, the Blue Ridge Parkway is today probably the most intact, historically correct cultural landscape, and it got that designation because it deserved it. And, you know, we paid attention to the stonework and everything that made up the Parkway. It was a pleasure to work with him. I really felt like I got to know his family over the years. When I traveled with him, he knew all the great places to eat, and we always had a great time talking through things. And I know everybody here has had personal experiences with him. He was that kind of person, and definitely made my career here at the Blue Ridge Parkway. And when he retired a little early and I was still there, I was taking the task of trying to come up with a bridge design that goes over Highway 26. That was a big thing. We were involved in the EA and everything, and it came about that we should design a bridge that was very much like Linco Viaduct, where it was a, you know, the type of bridge that was, you know, a box girder bridge. So what's over, we can be proud of what's over that highway now. It's a box girder bridge. It's a variable depth box girder bridge. It's a beautiful bridge. You drive over it, it gives you the feeling that it belongs there, even though it was one of the first realignments of the Parkway. But it was all that Gary had taught me, you know, before working with him, to know what that bridge should be. That it couldn't be the alignment of the original bridge. And it certainly has taken them a long time to build it. So that was a good, you know, we had to write value analyses and everything. So anyway, it was a pleasure to work with Gary. He used to joke with me about his white hair, that the federal highways did it. And none of my other siblings have white hair like I do. So did the Parkway do it? I don't know, but anyway, I got to know his sons through him, even though I hadn't met you personally. He talked about you all the time, and great guy. I miss him, and I was proud to work with him. Thank you.
I'm Carolyn. I work with the Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation, and I brought some notes. So I know you're hearing a lot of stories, but I just want to say, like, here's one plan with all my little notes all highlighted. This was the general management plan for Moses Cone. And then there was the neighbor's guide, which you heard mentioned. The actual last, I think, the last official general management plan done in the entire National Park Service, again, sort of with love, that Gary would point out the things that I needed to be looking at. The one he did with Laura, and I couldn't carry more. I have a box of them in my car if anybody wants to see them. And then, of course, the last legacy that Gary gave us. I was not privileged to know somebody like Stanley Abbott or Getting Browning. I didn't get to hear the stories about people that walked the ridges to try to line out the Blue Ridge Parkway. But I knew Gary. And because I knew Gary, I heard those voices in my head. The plums are the plums. And he meant that. And Sandy and Andrew and Parker, the legacy that Gary left all of us, both in our head when I drive the parkway and I hear the plums are the plums, and I go around that turn and I think that tree was planted there intentionally. And David Anderson and others that worked with Gary over all the years, every tree, every fence line is there intentionally. It is a designed landscape. The plums are the plums. And even though I didn't get to know those original designers because Gary's voice is now in my head, I feel like I realize what that must have been like for him to carry that legacy. And the work that he did to finish the book, the Blue Ridge Parkway, it is greater than the sum of its parts, and Gary knew that more than anyone. I can't think of a greater legacy than anyone could ever leave than to have an impact on a landscape that is generational. It wasn't a job for Gary. It wasn't. You're going to hear that. You've heard that already. You're going to hear that from others. It was his mission. He cared very deeply about what he was leaving, and he felt that. I heard that from him at the end, talking about trying to finish. He wrote the book. We published 50 copies of the book, and then I get a list of all the periods that were wrong, and fix the caption on this picture, and this must say this now and not that, because it mattered to him. And because it mattered to him, we have that. Not many people are going to get to have a Gary again. There's not going to be a lot of Garys again. It pains me a little bit about the loss of the legacy of that. But because it's in writing, everybody gets to have Gary again. And I didn't get to talk to Stanley Abbott and R. Getty Browning. I didn't get to hear those stories and know what that legacy meant. But because I knew Gary, I heard those voices. And that legacy will live on. And when all of us are gone and the next generation is here, experiencing the Blue Ridge Parkway, my grandchildren, people that we can't even envision right now, they're going to turn that curve on the parkway and they're going to see that fence line and that tree, and it's going to be because of the legacy Gary left. Sandy, thank you. Andrew and Parker, I can't imagine having Gary as a dad because I only had him for a little bit and his voice is in my head. So good luck with that. Thank you. Thank Gary for everything he did. And Sandy, here is the Blue Ridge Parkway on a scarf. Thanks to Karen. Thank you, Gary.
Good afternoon, I'm Dan Brown. I'd like to thank all of you for being here today to celebrate Gary's life, and to Sandy for inviting me to say a few words about Gary, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. We all know Gary as a loving husband, a caring father and father-in-law, proud grandfather, a professional associate, and an amazing friend. I first met Gary when he was relatively new Denver Service Center student landscape architect assigned to a federal highway road project at the Peaks of Otter, and I was the newly appointed sub-district ranger in 1975. And until I returned to the Parkway in 2000, I don't believe I ever worked with Gary on any projects, and if I ran into him, it was quite seldom. But Gary was the kind of person you never forget. I don't know if it was his engaging personality, pleasant smile, his ability to talk to anyone on his terms or her terms, or any number of special attributes he possessed, but you never forgot Gary Johnson once you had met him. And I know, even before I returned, Gary would be a critical manager that I would depend on each and every day. Gary coordinated and planning of the Blue Ridge Music Center, managed public input processes, and oversaw the design and construction of the Parkway Visitor Center, and the list goes on and on. Gary was a consummate professional and always someone who, as a manager, you wanted out in front on any issues that could potentially challenge the integrity of the Parkway, because if for no other reason, we all know that Gary was, as much as anyone and more than most, loved the Blue Ridge Parkway and its resources. And everything he did while working on the special assignment of Parkway's landscape architect put long-term protection and welfare first and foremost. On a personal note, Gary and I took on some pretty testy issues during my tenure. And while at times I contemplated Harry Carey, he was always able to make lemonade from lemons and turn lose-lose situations into win-win ones without compromising the integrity of the Parkway. His actions, he had in many ways explained why the Parkway's actions were critical not only to the long-term welfare of the Parkway, but also benefited the surrounding communities. And while everyone did not always agree, he had a way of reducing contention and tension and getting opposition to look for answers and solutions rather than reasons to oppose us. He was always able to put me at ease, prep me for any discussions, and maybe as important at the end of the day as anything else, make the ride home fun. Gary was my go-to when issues got sticky. When we were dealing with any controversial subject and I was getting a little hot under the collar and at a loss for words, Gary would step in just the right time, smooth things over, and offer a compromise that would solve the issue or buy us more time. Gary was a consummate professional and committed to serving the NPS mission and Parkway vision. Stanley Abbott, the Blue Ridge Parkway's first residential landscape architect and considered the father of the Parkway, once said in reference to Parkway design work, "Once you mess with Mother Nature, you have to keep at it." And Gary kept at it in all the right ways. ensuring that Parkway's vibrant and amazing landscape will continue to attract awestruck visitors for many decades to come. Gary had an acute, a somewhat quirky sense of humor. Gary was aware Linda and me had a reputation for over-the-top outdoor Christmas decorations, a distinction we share with the Griswold family from the movie Christmas Vacation. So when Gary and Sandy came over to our Christmas party, he presented us with a framed photo of the movie DVD cover, which showed Clark being fried while getting his lights to work. Only it was a picture of me, and the title was Welcome to the Brown Family Christmas. And I'll never forget the week we traveled around Oklahoma meeting with all the Native American tribes who originally located in southern Appalachians. We had lots of time to burn while traveling across the state, and someone started humming the country country tune, Living on Tulsa Time, but no one could remember the words. So Gary had us find a music store, and he bought a CD with the song, and we proceeded to play it for hours. When the week ended, he presented it to me, and the gentle giant Don Williams and I have been friends ever since. Gary was probably the closest thing I have ever personally known to what would be called a Renaissance man. Renaissance man means being a well-rounded individual with broad knowledge, skills, and interest in many fields, embodying intellectual curiosity, creativity, and personal development. It's about seeing connections between disciplines and striving for excellence and lifelong learning, not just being an expert in one niche, but a versatile, adaptable person. Is that not Gary Johnson? Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "Many people walk in and out of our life, but only true friends leave footprints in our hearts." I believe Gary Johnson left footprints in all of our hearts. An unknown author once wrote, "How lucky am I to have known someone who was so hard to say goodbye to." Thanks to all of you, and especially to Gary.
Hello, I'm Julia Johnson, married to Andrew, and I am honored to share these words today on behalf of Laura Rodegard, who worked closely with Gary for many years and held enormous admiration, respect, and affection for him. What I'm reading today is a shortened version of her full tribute, which is available if you'd like to read it. Laura wanted to begin by saying that many voices contributed to these memories, colleagues and friends, who all described Gary the same way. A natural teacher, a passionate professional, and a steady, quiet friend. She first joined Gary's team at the Denver Service Center in 1989. Even in the office filled with planners, designers, and landscape architects, Gary stood out immediately. He modeled kindness, patience, and optimism. He set a high bar, but he guided people toward it with encouragement, not pressure. He shaped countless young professionals. Many colleagues told Laura that Gary was steady, reliable presence, someone who genuinely looked out for the people he worked with. His workspace was creative, supportive, and even joyful. He celebrated his team's talents, including their eccentricities, and under his leadership, their work won repeated awards. Years later, when Laura rejoined Gary in Asheville, they worked together on visual resource protection that would influence the entire National Park Service. Under Gary's leadership, their team earned a national award from the American Society of Landscape Architecture and pioneered the first NPS method for identifying and protecting scenic views. Because Gary, countless adopted view protection ordinances, Land trusts expanded protected acreage, and even major lawsuits defending park views succeeded. One of Laura's favorite memories is of a high-stake meeting in Charlotte. Although the room was full of lawyers and specialists, attended by the NPS and Department of Interior solicitors, Washington NPS resource leaders, and Department of Justice solicitors, and the antagonist, the Federal Communications Commission, Gary was chosen to present the case for the National Park Service. He spoke with clarity, logic, and a deep love for the parks. When the meeting ended, they walked away with agreements that protected wilderness, cultural landscapes, and scenic views for years to come. The moment stood out because of Gary's clarity, confidence, and leadership, one of the proudest achievements of his remarkable career. He also had a sense of humor. When office politics got especially trying, he once taped a sign to his door that simply said, "Think," to consider, to weigh alternative ideas, to analyze, to ponder. It was his gentle way of steering everyone back towards reason. Even 8 years into retirement, Gary's commitment to the work never faded. He and Laura came together again to create the visual resource Best Practice Handbook, a project they poured themselves into long after either of them was expected to. Gary illustrated, Laura wrote, and together they revised and refined the work until it was right. And whenever Laura became frustrated, Gary would gently remind her, step back and think solutions. Personally, I hear that from my husband all the time. I love that that comes through still. In their later conversations, they reflected often on family, on their work, and on the legacy of the projects they had shaped together. Laura believes Gary's influence continues in his children and grandchildren, in his work, and in every person he taught, protected, and uplifted, like a gentle wind along the Blue Ridge Parkway, touching the people he loves. Laura wanted to close by saying, Gary championed the thoughtful, calm, reasoned way of life. May we honor him by doing the same.
I'm Phil Francis. I think I know most of you. But I was superintendent of the Parkway, and Gary was there being Gary. Sometimes I would get out of my car, and he would be getting out of his car on the way to work. He'd say, "Hello, partner. How you doing?" He was stealing this from Gary Everhart, but he used it quite often. He also did the same with Monica. Mayor's not here, I don't think. I think with her father, too. Gary was a practical joker. My gosh. One of the things that I love about the Blue Ridge Parkway during the time that I was there, and I'm sure it was that way before and after, but people had fun. They had a great time. You know, we didn't have much going on. We were just building rock walls, building new bridges, landslides. You know, not much was happening. Oh, celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Blue Ridge Parkway. We had that to do. You know, we were losing staff. We had special projects. We had controversies up in Virginia. Things were changing in North Carolina. I won't mention any more about those, but they existed. And so there was always something going on. Members of Congress calling, deciding that we had done something wrong. Other people calling, saying we'd done it right. We had a few lawsuits going on. We talked to the attorneys fairly often, you know, and it was a big job. Karen back there sold more books than she ever had before, right? Made more money. The Friends group was raising money. Carolyn Ward showed up before it was over. She's only taken $30,000 a year to $50 million. She's done pretty good. And the thing I wanted to say is that the atmosphere that existed on the Parkway was, despite all these other things that I've just mentioned, it was so positive, it was so great. And, you know, I really think people loved coming to work. Monty was working 24 hours a day. You could call Monty at 10 o'clock at night. My computer's not working. Monty would fix it. Didn't get paid to do it. He just did it. You know, so that was sort of the way it was at that time. It's gotten more challenging now. We've got a great superintendent, though. I've heard her speak. She's really good. But you know, Gary left a gift for us. Not only just the memories, not just the memories, and there's plenty of memories. I woke up at 5 o'clock this morning thinking about some of the memories. You know, but in several of you have sort of hit on this. Gary protected the park resources, both cultural and natural. He served the visitors well. He took on new places, new visitor centers, music center. You know, we had people coming in for record visitation, right? The most visited unit of the National Park Service. Our maintenance crew was getting smaller. You know, we were trying to take care of the Moses Cone estate. We're trying to do land exchanges up there. Our crews kept getting smaller. Ann Shoulders was over doing interpretation. Her staff was already small. We couldn't get it much smaller, right? But they did a great job. They loved coming to work. They had fun. And it was a special time. But what Gary gave us and all of those folks who work, on the Parkway, it's not just the view sheds. You know, it's the relationships with the communities, relationship with the individuals. Hill and Associates only published about 4,000 books. Wasn't it 4,200 and something, 300? It was a lot of books. And we gave one to every neighbor along the Blue Ridge Parkway, making suggestions about how they might be a good neighbor because of the view sheds. But think about a view shed. What is a view shed? It's not just what you see, it's also what's in it. You know, all the water that we drink, including here in Asheville, comes through a Blue Ridge Parkway view shed. It's got to be protected. And I've forgotten who said it, but Gary was dedicated to protecting and preserving and leaving unimpaired the natural and cultural resources and the wildlife therein by such means and in such manner, you know, so they'd be here forever. He really cared. But what a joker he was. Oh my gosh. We had so much fun. I'll never forget it. That's for sure. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tracy Swartout. I'm the current superintendent of the Parkway after these last few gentlemen. It's an honor to be asked to speak here. Thank you, Sandy. As you have heard from the extended National Park Service family here today, Gary was a gracious supervisor, a trusted colleague, an honored friend, and a lasting personality in our workplace. I remember when I first heard of Gary's work, I was in my 20s. It was the late 1990s, and I was at Arches and Canyonlands, and I was introduced to this new framework for how we would understand our possible impacts on the Park Service. It was called VERP. You know, like everything in the federal government, we have a great acronym, and I could never keep it straight what that acronym was. Visitor Experience and Resource Protection. It was later years that I realized how much impact Gary had in developing that. And the really important thing about that, if you don't know federal acronyms or don't really know behind the curtains in the National Park Service, is that it really sought to try to balance the way that we allow people to engage with our national parks all around the country up to the point where they don't do damage to it and don't negatively impact others' experiences. So that VERP framework I used to think of as, you know, the point at which you have too many people on the trail and you can't enjoy it anymore? Well, that's what it was looking to try to evaluate. And in many ways it was simple, but it was also really groundbreaking and influential for the time. But it's still used today. Every National Park Service unit in the entire country and the hundreds of millions of people who engage with them somehow have their experiences shaped by Gary's work. And it was because he cared. I didn't end up meeting Gary in person until the 2000s, and I traveled to the Parkway from DC or Congaree, where I was working. I came up for the 75th anniversary, but I remember he was the guy in the crowd that had like the sparkle in his eye and would pull me off to the side, and we'd engaged in an incredibly detailed conversation about something he was doing or something he cared about or something he heard me say that he wanted to go deep on. And I just remembered how touched I was that he gave of his time and his expertise to everyone, whether they were 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, or 80s. One of the things he always tried to connect with me on was to make sure that I understood that everything he ever did, everything he ever studied was available to me as a park manager, and he wanted to make sure he passed it down. He wanted to make sure that we had access to all the work that he did, whether it was in one of the many reports you saw or a private conversation on the side. He would squirrel away and find a way to make sure that you knew that he was there and all that he did was available to you. For me, in that way, he represents the very best of what it means to have service in something higher than yourself. His work to promote the preservation and protection of the essence and character of all national parks around the country, let alone the Blue Ridge Parkway, is really unparalleled. And he connects those voices of the early creation of the parks, like Abbott and Mather and others, to the voices of the present who are wearing the uniform today. So I come here as maybe the last of the Park Service speakers in uniform to represent the current and the future and the way that we will, moving forward, still carry those lessons that Gary imparted to us, the light that he shared with us during his lifetime. You know, we have a lot of damage from Hurricane Helene, but as you heard, it's not the first challenge that the Parkway's ever experienced. And what I committed to Gary and when I committed to Sandy and others is that we utilize those things that we learned from Gary, those battles that were fought, those challenges that were overcome, the vision to have this place be as valuable to people now and in the future as it ever was. That's a great influence, and we'll take that with everything we do. We'll take that light and carry it forward. But beyond all those things that he did for us and for parks around this country, we know that his greatest and most important role was that of as a devoted husband and a loving father and a devoted grandfather. So I want to say thank you to his family, because obviously we've talked for like a while, and we know that we just borrowed Gary from you for a little while, and we want to thank you for sharing him.
Ugh. Enough about the Parkway. I'm Parker Johnson. I'm his youngest son, and that's a recycled joke. We used to say that during dinner conversation often. He would come home, he'd regale us with stories of view sheds, still don't know what one is. May or may not care. But that is how we broke up dinner conversation. He would come back, he would talk about his life, and And we knew a very different side of Gary. I do want to take the opportunity to thank all the previous speakers for sharing your wisdom, sharing your insights. I think there's a lot of facets of Gary that we got all to experience. And so I do want to kind of segue from what he did back to who he was. And as I reflect on Gary, and have for the, last couple of months and weeks and days, there was an epiphany that I had. And it's that I didn't really share many of his passions. I never carved Indian flutes. I didn't really particularly care for the music that came from flutes that he played in the car. It was terrific. I just wanted a cool dad who listened to AC/DC, and I got to learn about the intricacies of the Indian flutes. Legos. Very wonderful pink flamingo mugs. There's a lot of passions that he had that I didn't necessarily share. But what I did kind of fully come around to is he always shared in my passions. Be it rock climbing, be it soccer in my youth, be it golf now, whatever it is, he always poured into that, embraced it, and produced whatever it might be that I was passionate about. So when I think about his creativity, and as his magnum opus really articulates, is his creativity through the work and how to accomplish and deliver that message. That was also what was delivered to us at home. So birthday cakes, as I reflect on the birthday cakes that we had, there's one photo that we could find, but countless others. I have very crystal memories of just the coolest cakes as a kid. As you progressed from that, the birthday cards, the Valentine's Day cards, whatever it might be, the envelopes were always better than the card inside. And ultimately, he just kind of fired Hallmark and created his own cards. And it was just amazing what all he would do. There's this little small simple bridge up here, it's in white. And that was when I moved from New York City to San Francisco. So he built a bridge that half represented the Brooklyn Bridge and half the Golden Gate Bridge. And there's a cake to celebrate my promotion and move across the country. And so there's a lot of those memories that I have of his, that was kind of the embodiment of his creativity on the personal side of things. So I didn't share many of his passions, but he always shared our passions with us and leaned in. And I kind of think of one of the Navy SEAL mottos, and I think it does embody him with a lot of respects. He was all in all the time. Outside of that creativity, it's come across from a few folks, but it is really fun. Fun in his sense of humor. That's really kind of the core of a lot of my stories that I could regale you with. And I think there's about a decade-long period where when I called him, he would just pick up the phone, Shamaraka Motel. Somewhere, somehow it came from, but he wanted to let me know that I was calling the Shamrock Motel, and ultimately we'd probably end up booking a room before I could ask him for another favor. He did a lot of characters, a lot of impersonations, a lot of accents, for which today he would be canceled. But much to my mom's chagrin, I'm going to go through them all now with you. Andrew, if you'll join me on stage. No, it was just a lot of fun. I think one of my favorite things, you never knew when it would break out, but it would break out, but we would have a pun battle. And so we'd go back and forth as fast and as hard as we could, figuring out how many puns we could. I relish when that happens to present itself at work. My boss, Rick Pataki, always cringes a little bit when it happens to emerge, and because I know I'll go through at least 3 or 4, then just call it quits for their own benefit. But the pun battles, he could do a peacock call, which I will refrain with a microphone in my face to replicate. But he'd find the most inopportune times to do a peacock call. We did one in the zoo with our aunt and uncle one time, I believe it was probably in Cleveland. And there's a little boy that came running around the corner to discover what was around that corner and making such a loud sound. And it was just my father, and it was a lot of fun. So the kid never knew who it was, but he was definitely still looking. raucous dinners. A very fond memory, and it was replicated on many occasions, but was a dinner Andrew joined us at this past February, where we had a little side partition, a little private table of 6 or so, and it was just how loud can we laugh, how many stories can we tell, and it was just all in all the time. And so there was 3 people competing for the microphone to tell the best story, the funniest story, and ultimately, my brother typically wins, but the loudest laugh. So those were always very fond memories that I have. As I reflect on kind of the work side of him, as I got into the teenage years, I really started to understand how special he was, how talented he was, and how unique he was. He made a lot of sacrifices to work at the Parkway, and I didn't necessarily understand what passion was and what his passion was. It wasn't necessarily articulated back to me through words, it was more through his actions. So I know he's passionate about us, but I don't think I grasped the passion that he had for the Blue Ridge Parkway. So I would urge him to quit and move into consulting, move into the private sector. Go triple your income today, you're almost close to retirement, so why not? And it took longer for me to actually understand why that potentially fell on deaf ears, or why he wouldn't or couldn't do it. It wasn't what he was interested in. His life had a calling, and he was exactly where he was. And through conversations over the last few months, he actually did tell me one of the stories where he contemplated it, and I think it was the early 80s, of moving into the private sector. And more or less when it was the time to pull the trigger of, am I gonna go or am I not? He had that gut instinct to not move into the private sector. And in a few short years, the project and the team that he would have joined actually, went bankrupt and defunct, and it just reaffirmed his passion of, I am where I belong, and this is where I'm gonna be. So it took me a while to understand exactly what his passion was, because it wasn't so clear. It wasn't really articulated to us at home. Boring us at dinner, yes, but outside of that, it's just really been a lot of fun over the last handful of years. I got to attend the ceremony where he was presented with the Appleman-Judd Award, and just hearing the things that people said about him and who he was at work helped me really understand why he was there and why he stayed. And that's been really kind of a fun thing to kind of evolve through my teenage years, early 20s and 30s into the 40s, to understand exactly the loudness of that calling and the power of what he could bring to the Parkway, and how we all can benefit from that. At his book signing, one of the kind of coolest quotes that I had is somebody approached me and said, "I'm his biggest fan." And that's pretty cool to hear somebody say about your father, that they're his biggest fan, that he has fans. He was just my dad, but he had that kind of impact, and this book matters that much. I'd also be remiss if I didn't thank Amanda. She was his rock through the last 18 months, helping with any and everything, translating through emails what was going on, so we all stayed in touch and could understand what was going on through his diagnosis, what the next steps were, so thank you. And may I leave you with a simple message. Memento mori. It's a Stoic's truth, but from that truth I would ask us all to remember to live, to remember what's important, and to really remember to seize the day. So with memento mori, I would love to kind of close on that as part of his legacy, and what we should all take from today is just that. Remember to live. Remember to be present. And remember what is truly important, both professionally and personally. Thanks again to all the other speakers. At this time, I would love if anyone else has something to say, you're more than welcome to contribute or share a story if you would like. thank you all for coming. Sincerely, I can't thank you enough. It's seemingly trite, but it means the world to me that you guys all were here to celebrate and remember his life. He touched you in many different capacities, whatever it might be, through the work you're continuing to do, through the work you've had, the careers. It's just really powerful for you all to be here, and it's greatly, greatly appreciated by me. As we conclude the service, I do want to kind of move into some of the logistics. We have food. We'd welcome all to stay, enjoy some food. There are also some to-go boxes if you can't stay but want to take some food to go, but would look forward for the conversation and stories to continue. Also, please feel free to come up here and see all the different mementos. Some of these are Christmas gifts that he made for us. So we'd come down on Christmas morning and find a battle of Indians, cowboys and Indians protecting the fort. That was handmade by him, and so a lot of his creativity is up here on this table, and it's a lot of fun to at least explore. So with that, thank you all.
With the light of Jesus' face, and I will not be ashamed, for my Savior knows my name. It don't matter where you bury me, I'll be home and I'll be free. It don't matter anywhere I lay. All my tears be washed away. Gold and silver